Well, hello, Hollis.
How you doing, Herb?
It's nice to see you. You're looking well. And thanks for joining me today to chat for a minute or two about music. Everybody in the family is doing well, and
Oh,
you've come from a very musical family.
right. Well, we tried to emulate the Bach family, and everybody, we got a lot of music going on, that's for sure.
Do you have 23 kids?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Not yet.
Bach was more than just a prolific composer, as we well know, right?
Right, right. That's
Tell me,
right.
actually, I've always wanted to chat with you about your um, I know you've had a lifelong devotion to music, but sort of what drew you into music in the first place? Did you start studying piano or something as a little kid, or how did all that begin?
Well, I grew up in a musical family, 5 generations we've had so far of musicians. My grandfather was a singer, and he sang in the Chicago Symphony Chorus,
Ah,
and he did some kinds of, what should I say, musical theater, uh, very famous musical theater works called the Queen Esther was a major, what should I say, a major uh, dramatic production, and he was involved with that. And my father came a generation later, was involved in the Renaissance of Heinrich Schütz and the Bach uh, that happened in the 1940s and the 1950s. So I grew up listening to my father sing many Bach cantatas. And I have a picture here of my father. And here I'm sitting next to him. I probably am like 1 year old. And I keep this right where I compose because this is Bach cantata number 56, which he sang. And I have his score and I have his notes and his translation. And it's one of my favorite pieces that he sang. So I grew up listening to my father singing Bach, Mendelssohn, and Handel. My mother was a school teacher and librarian, and she used to read me many books. And one of my favorite books is Opal Wheeler's Bach, Sebastian Bach book, children's book, and I have all the composer books. So I was involved with my musical family. And so when I started studying piano, my sisters studied violin and 2 cellists in our family. And so we had a whole musical family. We would give these little family salon concerts when we were all starting to play. So I come from a very musical family who loves music.
so it sounds like you had lots of people who played instruments and including the human instrument of the voice, and that's terrific. But it's a big step from playing and studying and loving music to making a lifetime of composing music, which is the step you made. Um, did you find yourself thinking that you had something to say that another composer hadn't, or did you just find yourself intrigued by the pleasure and the journey of making music, or how did all that happen?
Well, when I was growing up and taking piano, I had a piano teacher that allowed me to write some music, and so I would write some little pieces, and she would let me perform them on my recital. As time went on, however, I went on to undergraduate school, and I really didn't start taking my first composition lesson until my last course in undergraduate school. So I was a kind of a late developer. And then from there, I went on to graduate school at Northwestern University and then Eastman School of Music, and I took it seriously. But I made my living as a teacher of English and music and as a school administrator. So the composing was something I did on the side while I was earning my living as an educator. So music was a very important part, but it wasn't the way I earned a living.
So there's a lot of very famous American composers who did that. The one that springs to my mind first is Charles Ives.
Right.
Actually, Charles Ives sold insurance, and and of course he's been gone for a long, long time. But I think to this very day, some of his innovations in the insurance business are still standard practice. That's an amazing legacy for a person whose musical voice of American music is so big. Hey, listen, tell me about, so you heard your father singing Bach, and and you heard him singing that wonderful Cantata 56. What about, was that what made, because I know you have a strong love of Bach's music, and you somehow that merges with your own language a little bit, or at least it influences it. Is that, do you think that's where it came from? Have you thought about that much?
Well, I did research. The church I grew up with in a huge Lutheran church in Illinois. I did a research project on the music from the 1930s to the 1970s, and I was able to have access to all the documents. And I found out that 50% of all the compositions that were done at the church was Bach. And of course, I grew up in a Lutheran congregation, and they started a Bach concert series just like you did in 1970. And my dad was involved in singing many of the cantatas. So it's like I heard Bach over and over again, and I loved playing Bach. I studied piano. I played some of his concertos, and I really, Bach's music just was infused with my musical upbringing and imagination. So that's, I think, why Bach became my most important influence on my life and my composition career, because I wanted to be like Bach. And
Well, that's like a basketball player saying they want to be like Michael Jordan or LeBron James. I mean, you can't do. And you know what? As you were saying that, I found myself just thinking, "Wow, hasn't the world changed?" Because a generation, maybe 2 generations ago now, in a Lutheran church, a big Lutheran church, of course, you say Bach was half the music that was performed. Today, there are groups like mine. I'm so proud of Bach in Baltimore. And, there's Emmanuel Music in Boston. There's a few of us around, but it's mostly in concert halls. And it's the Brandenburg concertos and the orchestral suites forever, and just the 10 most popular cantatas, and that's it, as opposed to all 200 and something. So, I'm so pleased to hear that you had that really wonderful background. So we've had in Bach in Baltimore the enormous pleasure of having some world premieres of some of your compositions, and I've always thought it's a great privilege to do things that are contemporary, but that grow out of a tradition. And I wanted to ask you 2 questions in the minute or 2 we have left. The first is, how do you see Bach's music today, which, he died in 1750, so music that's pushing 300 years old, how is that music somehow modern or relevant enough to people in the year 2020 in a technological age? What is it about Bach's music that's lasted?
Well, to answer that question, my wife Jackie and I went to Leipzig and spent a week there, and every morning we would go to St. Thomas Kirche just as it was opened, and someone would be practicing the organ, and we would just go in there just ourselves, sit by Bach's grave, and we would listen. And one morning a group of people came out of the bus and came into the church quietly, didn't say a word. They surrounded his grave, they held hands, and they sang Bach, spontaneous. So that's the answer to the question, is that there's this tremendous emotional, spiritual legacy of Bach that is part of the human race. That's how important he is.
So as I just said a moment ago, this will be my last question, if you don't mind. We've had the pleasure, and I've had it personally, to premiere several of your works. And I'm thinking back to, for example, the 2011, when we premiered a Passion that you wrote.
Right.
And of course, Bach wrote, we think 3 Passions. We have 2, but the St. Mark, we're pretty sure he wrote and has been lost. But that's an example of you emulating or making use of a similar form that Bach did. Can you say a couple words about that piece, and maybe when you're done, I'm going to warn you in advance. I'm going to ask you if it might be all right if we just play a little excerpt of that on this moment of chatting together, if that's okay with you.
That's great. Yeah, the Bach Passions, definitely, I grew up listening to them. Like I said, my dad soloed in them, and I got to know them very well. And so when I finally decided to write a passion after many years, and it's like a 75-minute piece, I used some of little fragments of Bach that his music became an inspiration to move this piece forward. So I have recitatives, I have arias, I have dramatic choruses, I have choruses. I use his favorite instrument, which was the oboe. My daughter plays the oboe and also the horn. My son plays the French horn. And then Jackie sang in the chorus, and my oldest son, was the narrator, who was Nicodemus. I told the story through the eyes of Nicodemus, and that's from the Gospel of Nicodemus, which is an apocryphal work, but I also used the Gospel of John. And Jason's wife, Treva, also had soprano solos, as well as some friends, musical friends of ours, that sang the tenor solo and the role of Jesus. So Bach is so infused in this. And so when I sat down and wrote this piece, it's his passions that were there. It was the model for it. But I tried to make it a little bit different. I added a xylophone, a marimba. I added some percussion that Bach wouldn't have had. But his passions are infused and inspired this work. And it's in homage to him that I wrote it.
Well, it's wonderful, and thanks for telling me reminding me a little bit about how lovely it was, and what a tremendous thing pardon me, it was as a family affair, basically, because Bach was certainly a family man, wasn't he? And so let's conclude with a little excerpt from your Passion, recorded in our premiere performance together in March of 2011. And as we move to that, let me close with by just saying thank you so much for taking time with us today. It was a real pleasure.
Well, thank you, Herb, for doing my music. Thank you very much.